When people all over the country are trained to think of immigrants as invading our way of life, trying to rip apart our civilization and undermine our values, when we're trained to think of them as a little bit less than, less deserving of rights, less human, animal-like almost, and when we're trained to think of them as bringing disease and bringing criminality into our communities, and when we're trained to think of them as even people who would subvert the rule of law of the United States and take back territory, good people will be inculcated to hate. And the suggestion is not that implicit that maybe communities should take matters into their own hands.
And my gosh, we better wake up soon.
Or we're going to wake up dead.
The Anti-Defamation League is exposing these trends and this rhetoric because words have consequences. There is a direct connection between the policies we have in our society, the words of leaders, and the daily lives of minority communities and immigrants. And unfortunately, we have seen hate crimes against Latinos, Asians, and other immigrants on the rise.
Well, while we hope that people will work with us to take hate out of the debate, we recognize that ultimately our own community will have to harness its growing economic and political power to make change. You know, Latinos by the end of this decade, 2010, will represent $1 trillion in buying power. And we are now seen as a recognized growing political force. So before we open up for questions, I'd like for our Vice President at NCLR, Cecilia Munoz, to come in and talk about the impacts of that growing political power today. Cecilia?
Thank you very much, Janet. What the pundits that Janet's talking about and the candidates that we've referenced want us to think is that they can draw a box around the undocumented population and isolate it, and then that's something that Latinos don't care about and aren't integrated with. And they're wrong about that. Essentially, our community is very deeply integrated. Just as immigrants are fully integrated into the economy of this country, they're integrated into communities across the country. We live under the same roofs, we live in the same communities, we are co-workers, we worship together. It's like a candidate saying to a Latino voter, don't worry, I don't mean you, but I want to deport your brother-in-law and your cousin and the person you go to church with. It affects us deeply as a community, and the insulting language that you saw on the screen is not just insulting to immigrants, it's insulting to all of us. It's important to understand two things about how the wave of hate that Janet has just described can have an impact on the election this year. First, the Latino community is affected by it and is watching very closely. And second, Latinos are poised to have a significant impact on the outcome of this year's election. There is no better evidence of that than the outcome of Florida's primaries the day before yesterday. Immigration was not the wedge issue that some candidates were hoping it was going to be. It did not deliver a large number of anti-immigrant voters for the candidates who were seeking to energize that part of the electorate. It did, however, have an influence on the Latino vote. Latino voters in Florida strongly supported John McCain, and they favored Rudy Giuliani over Mitt Romney, who used the issue most aggressively in the campaign. And that vote and that differential effectively delivered the state to John McCain. There is real history to this phenomenon. It was true 10 years ago during the last very ugly anti-immigrant wave. That was the height of what we remember as the Pete Wilson era. He used the anti-immigrant Prop 187 in California as part of his reelection bid, and he won his reelection in the short term. But the energized Latino community ended up changing the political dynamics of the state. Latinos went from 10% of the electorate in California to 16% over that period. And nearly half of the Latino registered voters in California today have registered since 1994, which was the height of the Pete Wilson era. There's a reason that California went from a purple to a blue state, and that is the reason why. The history shows that when Latinos are angry, naturalization rates go up, followed by voter registration and voter participation. The trend lines from California are repeating themselves now. Naturalizations just hit a record high. More than 1 million people came forward to become U.S. citizens last year. And there is every reason to expect that this energy, it will be followed by equally high levels of voter registration and voter participation in Latino communities. NCLR, NALEO, who's represented here, and many, many other organizations around the country are part of an unprecedented collaboration to help immigrants naturalize and to help register voters and turn them out on Election Day. We're expecting very big results to those efforts. There's also ample additional evidence that we are good and angry. A recent poll by the Pew Hispanic Center found that nearly 2/3 of Latinos say that the failure of the immigration bill last summer has made life more difficult for Latinos overall, and roughly half say that it has affected them personally. NCLR conducted a poll in the 2 days prior to the '06 elections that found two big things. One was that there was off-the-charts interest in the elections by Latino voters, and the second is that immigration was a major motivating factor driving people to the polls. It's very clear we're going to see a significant increase in the number of Latinos voting this year. We are the fastest growing segment of the electorate. Our percentage growth is 3 times the rate of whites and 4 times that of African Americans. If you do a straight line calculation based on 2004 census voting numbers, that suggests that as many as 1.9 million additional Latinos will vote in 2008 for a projected total of 9.5 million voters. And if we are energized, if we go beyond just the straight trend line because we are excited about this election, that number could go up by another 1 or even 2 million voters. There are 4 major electoral states that have Latino populations greater than 30%, California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, and another 6 states, Nevada, Colorado, Illinois, Florida, New York, and New Jersey, that are all between 12 and 24% Latino. We're going to have an impact on this election. The bottom line is that while we believe all Americans should be concerned about the presence of hate groups and extremists in the immigration debate, it is very clear that Latino voters are concerned. We may see a toning down of this issue at the presidential level, given the outcomes of the primary elections, but we fully expect we're going to see this issue being used in many congressional races, as some candidates continue to believe that this is an issue which can energize anti-immigrant voters and continue to believe that there isn't a price to be paid by angry Latino voters at the polls. We think they're simply wrong. Given that Latino voters are angry and likely to have an impact on this election, we would think that candidates on both sides of the aisle would do well to take note. Thank you.